here. The beginning. I got it.
Yeah, that's all good.
Let me, okay. So yeah, you're right. This is a huge topic, and it's been my let's say field of research and my living for the last 30 years or so. And I'm not gonna be very extensive on many aspects of it today, but I'm gonna focus on the things that I think we need to know in terms of brain dynamics, and I'll focus there. And so the brain field dynamics of meaning and knowledge creation, which for me an inspiration to understand better human consciousness, meanings and values, focusing that on how to achieve inner peace and social harmony, how to help people achieve inner peace and social harmony. And so that was my first motivation many years ago. And of course, today I'm going to focus on the brain of Melchizedek a little bit, which is the thesis in cognitive neuroscience I wrote and published in my master's thesis in Otago University in 2009. That was a thesis geared to create a paradigm, a research paradigm, to investigate how does the brain of a prophet or prophetess, or or a saint or an enlightened person, shifts from survival routines to a peace that it's ongoing and it's sustained and accompanied with wisdom and proper actions in the world most of the time, if not all. And so that thesis had a very important distinction between mystical experiences, religious experiences, and spiritual experiences. I'm not gonna go there today. That's a whole field, and a whole chapter of the thesis. But there is another chapter that is on spiritual values and behavioral values, and that's where I'm gonna focus here. What's the difference of behavioral values, and what's the difference from spiritual values? And okay, so where are we here? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. Okay. So, and then after I cover behavioral values and spiritual values, I will also make a connection, a brief connection between meanings and value. I mean, what's meaningful to us, we value, and what's of value to us becomes meaningful. And so that's a kind of intuitive, very quick connection. And how the cycle of creation of knowledge and meaning, which is a hypothesis we coined, and when I say we, was Robert Cosma, myself, in collaboration with Walter Freeman, and then Grant Gillette from Otago University participated in the philosophical aspects of that, came up with, which is an exploration of how the brain participates in the creation of knowledge and meaning. And of course, that was a very important aspect to solve, because as biological beings, even though spiritual life, for some people with different metaphysical commitment means different things, the brain, no matter which one is the truth, the brain is involved. So we had to understand how the brain participates in knowledge, in the creation of knowledge and meaning. And then I may, but I doubt today I will touch on that, but I may mention a brief introduction to the pulse wave to pulse conversion and the energetics of the brain that are involved in meaningful intentional actions and value-based decision-making. And by pulse wave pulse conversion, I mean going from action potentials into dendritic currents and then new action potentials, and how that feedback actually, it's what really creates perception, and how meaning it's encoded in large-scale integration oscillatory patterns instead of just the action potentials. Okay, so that's that. And so what are the questions we're exploring here today? Well, mainly the questions are, how do meanings and spiritual values become cognitively relevant to people? How do they manifest in brain dynamics? How do they capture the essence of a prophet, a mystic, or a prophetess, or a tzaddik, it's a Hebrew word, or tzaddikah for a person who is saintly. within the context of any philosophical views, religious beliefs, or traditions. So basically, these are questions which transcend any particular religious belief or theological commitment. So how do we learn from stories and first-hand experience how to achieve inner peace and effectively contribute to social harmony? And those are questions, that I've been researching for many years. And the focus on the brain dynamic side is, of course, how does the brain create knowledge and meaning? And well, this is basically the bigger picture overview, apart from quantum field theory and all sorts of things that I'm not putting here today. But this one is the brain side. This one is the heart rate variability side. And then these two somehow feed all the philosophical, spiritual revelations or intellectual understandings or interpretations of those experiences. And of course, all that goes down to decision making, social decision making, and inner peace and social harmony, and individual sovereignty and social sovereignty, and so on. And none of that I'm going to cover today. I'm just going to stay more on this area here and here. All right. So before I do any further explanation of the cycle of knowledge and meaning, I have to introduce you to Freeman neurodynamics, because it was on the bedrock and the foundation that he created, his legacy, that we're building all these hypotheses and theories. So on meaning and intentionality. And of course, Walter was very interested in cognitive science and consciousness and intentionality and causality. He asked the question of what is consciousness, and it is known, he says it's known through experience of the activities of one's own body's observation of the bodies of others. And he was not too concerned really about what kind of metaphysical commitment we had, if it arose from the soul, like Eccles was posing, or if it was a panpsychic property of matter, as Whitehead was posing, or Chalmers, or some of these philosophers, and or if it was just an emergent property of brain operation. That was not relevant here. What physical commitment you take. What was relevant, it's the pertinent question are, however it arises and it's experienced. How and in what sense does it cause the functions of the brain and bodies? And how do brain and body function cause it? How do actions cause perception? How do perceptions cause awareness? And how do states of awareness cause actions? And of course, he was thinking about the analysis of causality, which is a necessary stepping stone towards comprehending consciousness. And I think that will do for now. He wrote many papers. His literature is extensive. I'm just going to take it from 1990, which is much closer to us, and where he starts with a paper that he immediately, criticizes the people who uphold too strongly the neuron doctrine and representationalism, by saying that representations are not what the brain is doing, that there are some forms of representations, but not when it comes to meanings and intentional actions, and who needs them. And that was a paper with him and Scarda. Then there was another important paper that you all need to read if you want to, familiarize with Walter's legacy, a neurobiological interpretation of semiotics, meaning, representations, and information, a neurobiological theory of meaning and perception. There are 3 parts to that paper. This is only part 1, information and meaning in non-convergent and local brain dynamics. Nonlinear brain dynamics and intention, according to Aquinas. This is a must read to understand Walter's understanding of brain dynamics and the brain and intention and action. And cinematic, this book he wrote just at the end of his life, basically published it with Robert Cosma. And it's called Cognitive Phase Transitions in Cerebral Cortex, Enhancing the Neuron Doctrine by Modeling Neural Fields. So basically, they connected the action potentials with the fields of the brain, and they show that the real integration and creation of knowledge and meaning happened in the fields and not necessarily in sensory data or just basically raw input or the primary action potentials and things like that. So then there is a cymatic operation of cerebral cortex interpreted via critical transitions in self-organized systems dynamics or dynamic systems. And of course, semiotic dynamics, where in a conversation and reflection at Trinity College, he explained very important aspects of meaning and knowledge and intentionality. And I have quoted one quote from each paper, which will give you a very good taste of what Walter really was about. And so in the first paper, talking about representations, he said, we propose, however, that physiologists avoid this way of thinking for two reasons. One is that no one now understands how brain work, but the use of the term representation and its attached concept tends to obscure this fact. The term gives us the illusion that we understand something that we do not. Brains obtain information about the world through the consequences of their own embodied actions. The information that's obtained is used in constructing meaning, and it's then discarded. One kind of information in the world consists of representations made by other brains for social communication. Like, for example, when we label car a car or a plate, those words represent an object, but objects don't have meaning, intrinsic meaning. Meanings within ourselves are a completely different creature for Walter Freeman. The operations of predicting, planning, acting, detecting, and learning comprise the process of intentionality by which brains construct meaning. The currency of brains is primarily meaning and only secondarily information. The core Aquinian concept of the unity of brain, body, and soul mind, which had been abandoned by mechanicists, has been revived by Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, but in a phenomenological terms that are opaque to neuroscientists. In my experience, there is no extant philosophical system than that of Aquinas that better fits the new findings of nonlinear brain dynamics. Our results indicate that perception are formed through a phase transition from a disorganized high entropy, which we will see that, to a well-organized low entropy state, which explains the swiftness of the emergence of the perceptual experience in response to learned stimuli. The exclusion of semantics, meaning, and interpretation from exact sciences is nothing but an antiquated prejudice. It is a consequence of a century-old approach toward science, and it seems inevitable to update scientific reasoning in a way capable of taking these issues into account. And he dedicated this book basically to, it's written here, this work is dedicated to scientists who persevere in questioning prevailing dogma in search of wisdom in the frontiers of neuroscience. Now that's pretty pioneering and challenging for us. And I think it puts really clearly to me that we shouldn't reduce psychology and the psyche to neuroscience. And I think both psychology and neuroscience can explain different aspects of human existence. And so they should continue to complement each other. So what do we get, from all these readings? Well, let's just summarize very briefly. Okay, so we derived that machines process information, that brains do not process information, brains sample information, hold it briefly, construct meaning, and then discard the information. And those meanings that are very relevant are kept in memories. Computers process information, whereas brains create meaning. Brains obtain information about the world through the consequence of their own embodied actions. The information that's obtained is used in constructing meaning, and it's then discarded. there is no extant philosophical system than that of Aquinas that better fits the new findings of nonlinear brain dynamics. And that's basically, in a nutshell, Freeman neurodynamics on meaning and knowledge. Now, what did we do with Walter? So first of all, we analyzed brain data, and this is one sample of Walter's Freeman lab brain data on rabbits, where Walter measured signals on the cortex via ECOG, and then provided a stimuli to the rabbits to see how the brain dynamics in different bands, oscillatory bands, responded to that stimuli. And those bands were actually filtered and then Hilbert transformed, and from that transform, a phase of the signal was calculated, and out of the phase, then we derived the instantaneous frequency. And those were the tools that Walter used to analyze brain dynamics. So some of the tools that I supported Walter to build were movies of the brain dynamics. And so this one particularly here, it's 40 experiments of the same stimuli presented at second number 3, where before that the rabbit is doing whatever it's doing, and after that there is 1 window second where the whole stimuli is resolved. And I want you to see 40 different experiments and what happens at the same time. I'm not going to bias you to tell you what's happening, just try to capture the dynamics. Down there you have the clock. This is quarter of a second now. Approaching half a second. And it's heading towards the last bit of the window second post stimuli. I don't know if you had enough time to see what was happening. I'm gonna run it one more time. And maybe now I'll briefly comment. It's all green, whatever that means, don't worry about that. It's all green. Towards quarter of a second, the system starts to oscillate and there are rotational patterns. The amplitude starts to raise dramatically, and then they go down again, back to green, then they raise again, and then it all goes back to background activity, which is basically green stuff. Let's call it green dynamics. All right, so I hope that was illustrative of what happens after post-stimuli. And of course, in here, we have more precisely what's going on there. Here's where the stimuli is presented. You see, this is where the greeny area of the movies is happening. These are 64 signals in a little matrix in the visual cortex of the rabbit in a section no more than maybe half a centimeter times half a centimeter. So this is where the stimuli is presented. This is the desynchronization moments and the amplitudes raising for one experiment only. And these are the desynchronization moments. You can see them very clearly. There are desynchronizations here and the amplitudes collapse, like here. So all these events are very important in processing the stimuli. And so we wondered, okay, so what in the world can capture better what's going on in that window, in that second window? And of course, I mean, in that second window, all over here, this is more of the random stuff, which is the entropic background activity of the brain. But this one is a highly ordered phase transition, which is what Robert and Walter were talking about. And this was captured by an index that I created well, no, that index, first of all, was created by somebody, other groups, but I added a new feature to that with the face, which is a pragmatic information index. This is adding that feature, and we're capturing here all these disordered pattern very clearly for rabbit data. And so we wondered how would be that for human body, human beings. And of course, this pragmatic information index was elaborated mathematically here in this paper called Nonlinear Brain Dynamics as Macroscopic Manifestation of Underlying Many Body Fields Dynamics. That is a paper by Freeman and Vitiello, which collaborated a lot in the quantum field theories of brain dynamics. And this here is the pragmatic information index or ratio. Now you notice here that this is amplitude square. This is the Euclidean distance, which is the distance between the signals, whether in amplitude terms or in phase terms. So it's how far, when they're desynchronized or the amplitudes go away from each other, how far they go away altogether. And of course, if this tends to 0 and this tends to be really high, then this explodes. And so this name was named pragmatic information after the work of Atman-Spacher and Schrein-Graber, who have worked extensively on that. And here, this is, by the way, one of the experiments that we did in the study we conducted here, our lab in the cognitive lab at Ian's lab. And this is the task of word processing. And you see the signals here. These are the instantaneous frequencies. These are the phase signals. These are the analytic amplitude. These are the signal amplitude. This is the one important here. You see at this time, there is a raise in amplitude very, very clearly for all signals because there is a white space around here. This is the mean of that signal. And you see there is this big, bigger moment of amplitudes. And here we see that this Euclidean distance falls to 0 for a period of time. That's this period of time where the instantaneous frequencies start going all over the place. That's the same period where the analytic amplitude have raised significantly, same period where there is a synchronization in all signals in phase. And once this has been processed here, this is the pragmatic information index based on the Euclidean distance of phase, and this one on amplitude. This is much clearer, so that's the one I use. And you can see that there is a big peak here. And the point is, there has to be peaks according to our hypothesis before a person press a button recognizing the word that is being presented scrambled, because that's when the meaning went into an aha moment and say, oh yes, that's that kind of word. And so they press the button. And so meaning had to be built before the button was pressed. And we observed that in every single experiment we run in the lab. So that's an important feature. It's just that in human terms, this is not just 1 second. This can be 9 seconds because it can take a longer time to process a stimuli that nobody has learned and to try to find the meaning of that stimuli for a human being and to reflect if it's the right meaning or not for a little while, and then to press the button. And then this is the cycle of creation of meaning and knowledge as Robert Cosma, Grangillet, and I hypothesized. It got 5 stages. First is the O stage, where the animal attentional system is fully captured. It lasts for about 100 milliseconds in average. This is then another label we put. All this is arbitrary. Chaotic exploration, which is about 200 milliseconds, is when the animal or the person it's exploring which kind of stimuli is that. It's the moment that the stimuli tends to be categorized. The aha moment, it lasts about 150 milliseconds. And it's the moment where the stimuli have been categorized for good or bad. It doesn't have to be a right category. But the animal or person has made up their consciousness or brain dynamics to say, well, this is the stimuli. And this is chaotic integration, which is about 150 milliseconds also, which also it's an exploratory moment here where the animal is just trying to make sense of, well, what am I going to do with this stimuli that now I know what it is? And then background activity after action or inaction. And that's in a nutshell what's going on in this window of 1 second, according to our conjectured or hypothesized cycle of creation of knowledge and meaning. And these are the steps of the cycle. And I would like now to introduce you to a moment of contemplation in the natural world. This is the star of this movie that we're going to see one. His name is Casey. Casey is swimming in a very cold river in Oregon at the house of a friend who trained Casey to chase pebbles. He asked me to play with the dog one day, and I realized, man, I need to film this. This is perfect for brain dynamics and behavior. And so I filmed Casey playing the game of chasing pebbles, but I made sure that the stimuli was not captured by Casey visually, but he could hear it. So I throw it on his back. And so he's capable of filtering all the noises of this river and recognize the object of his game and chase it many times, all the time, as many times as I will play with Casey. And so the point is that in the movie you're going to see a clock where the cycle of creation of knowledge and meaning steps are statically displayed, each step, and the clock of the movie is going on, and they are almost fitting, to the second, to the millisecond. What happens in brain data of the rabbit? Now, the brain of a dog and the brain of a rabbit shouldn't be too different, or at least that's an assumption that we make. So let's see what happens here. Watch the movie, and I'll carry on later. All right, so these are some of the references of all these papers that are backing up our studies, and which I presented briefly to you. And you can look them and enjoy them if you want to read them. Oh my God, this is not where we are. And now we go here. Okay, so the next part of the presentation is going to be a brief introduction to the brain and paradigm of Melchizedek, and what's the distinction between spiritual values and behavioral values, and how that affects brain dynamics, and how spiritual values can become transformational to behavioral values, or how spiritual experiences can transform behavior. And so basically, I would like to say that I'm convinced that the initial exploration, or better reiterate, because I said that in 2009, of the distinction between behavioral values and spiritual values, that distinction is a necessity whose time has come. And spiritual values are universal, with or without the agency of a human or behavioral component. They are embedded in existence. They are always liberating and ever expanding our human consciousness. They're absolute in meaning, power, goodness, beauty, and truth, mainly related to our moral, spiritual, and subjective nature when it comes to the human experience of these values. And Kerry Jackman, which Kerry, some of you know Kerry really well. She put this, she sent this to me in a letter of a document that she have published in a government website of the Ministry of Education when they were evaluating values or something like that. I wish Kerry was here to tell us, but I'm just going to read what she wrote. She wrote, which I found really interesting when I was writing The Brain of Melchizedek. She wrote, normative values are based on a set of boundaries and behaviors developed through fear and reward conditioning. They are patterns of behavior where individuals are entrained to react and feedback to an external source, separated from the source of universal values. They are held beliefs or thought processes, and thought processes. Universal values come straight from the universal source of these values. They are directly sustained and accessible through the acknowledgement and relationship with, for her, the father, mother love of all creation. They are spiritual values. They are beyond mental boundary or social, cultural, racial, or religious behavior. They are beyond the behavioral values of honesty and respect, moral codes of conduct. One can be honest yet not living in truth. And when I read that, I said, Carrie, do you mind if I just quote you on the brain of Melchizedek? And she agreed with that. She was very happy for me to do that, so I did. But this is what I was writing about, which was very similar. However, it was a little bit different too. I wrote, universal values are the antidote to greed, fear, anger, guilt, misuse of power, and chaos in general, because they are grounded in connectedness, are an invisible yet apprehensible presence, essence, and forces, which may beget noble human thoughts and feelings that are beneficial to the body, our mental, emotional, and physical well-being, are the foundation to constructive intelligence and altruistic action for the well-being of the human family and beyond. They may lead to the exploration of the source of all values, or the value giver, the ultimate value and everlasting, never-changing presence, existence itself, how values are conceived ontologically, existentially, the eternal all-being, which in many traditions, like Chinese, have been called by different names. Lao Tzu called it the Tao, Carl Jung called it the spirit of the deep, and I am, it's a very familiar qualifier for that which is pure existence and the source of our being in many traditions and in many wisdom books. So what are behavioral values then? In contrast, I describe them as sometimes limiting and sometimes supporting of human experience. Different cultures accept as correct some different things than other cultures. So sometimes they limit, sometimes they support human expression. In one culture, some people are supported in some ways and limited in some others. In another culture, then some people are limited in different ways and supported in others, but they are relative meaning and power, goodness and beauty. They are basically relative to culture, and loyalties to culture are mainly related to a biological, physical, and objective reality, and the way it affects an individual can be transformed, behavioral values, by the agency of universal values. Just imagine this boy who is a gang member and meets this woman, and he finally gets married with her, but 2 weeks after he meets her, no priest, no police officer, no counseling, nothing will change the behavior of this guy, no jail. And suddenly this meeting and completely changed his manners. He's gentle, he's talking really nice. And the question is, well, how did that happen? What happened? What was this non-linearity, this phase transition on this individual? It wasn't gradual. And he explains, well, it was the love of my wife. So there are many stories in the world like that, where the agency of a value of love or a person, objectified love in a person, it's a transformative agent for the human psyche. So I say that universal values have this transformative power. They can transform behavior, and they can make people change from one culture to another easily. They can make people change their religious belief or accept others more easily, or even fully embrace people, because now they love people for being people and not just for being part of their own clan or religion or nation or group. So that's basically the difference between them. And you can see here that some of the difference in behavior or practices in terms of religion and doing stuff. When it comes to behavioral values, we have religious rituals like sharing bread and wine, mystical paths like Tantra yoga. We have people describing, good things for them spiritually as workshops and quantum healing, let's say. surfing, waiting for waves and walking in nature in silent moments, playing music. People describe it as a very good ritual for spiritual experience. Walking in God's will, whatever that means, many people describe that too. And but from the spiritual perspective, values perspective, and the I am identity perspective, in any of these cultures or cultural behaviors or rituals or behaviors, we can find individuals that are embodying grace, peace, and unity while they are sharing bread and wine or doing yoga or whatever these activities are. And or any of these other values can be actually embodied by many people in different traditions or in different countries doing these kind of activities. So the question is, if these are the values that we are seeking to embody, aren't they the universals that we aim at to find inner peace instead of just the ritual? Because sometimes the rituals don't work. Many people meditate for years and they don't find peace. Then you ask them why. He says, well, I don't seem to find a love in my heart or grace or peacefulness or warmth. And so there is something more than just practicing a ritual that actually leads us to inner peace. And I contend, or not contend, but I stand for that these universals, which are inherent in life, when we tap into that field of values, we are able to find inner peace. Now, the question is, how do we do that? And of course, I'm gonna just finish the presentation today here. I'm not gonna cover the neuroenergetics of the brain and the pulse to wave conversion function, unless you have questions later. I'm just gonna go straight into this area here, where we will find something really interesting. This is the cycle of creation of knowledge and meaning step by step. This is how we characterized every step. These are the milliseconds associated to every step. Robert Grant and I characterize that as hypersynchronization and low amplitude square. Then for chaotic exploration, that was O, chaotic exploration, we characterize that as desynchronization moments with dramatic drops, which we call null spikes in analytic amplitude, and then a very strong grace, which you saw in the movies. Then the aha moment, it's the tendency towards synchronization and drops in amplitude again. Then we have chaotic exploration, which is a strong desynchronization, null spikes, which is when the amplitudes drop to 0. I didn't show you that today. With a strong raise in analytic amplitude and then back to background activity. That was the green stuff that I told you, that, in the movies, it's a green dynamics. Synchronization with low amplitude square and occasional desynchronization periods showing high analytic amplitude. Now, these have been addressed by Brentano. Brentano, when describing how people process stimuli, he spoke that, the type 1 activity that happens is targeting or noticing a stimuli, something relevant, salient. Then the type 2 moment of the process that relates here to us, to our cycle, it's binding its stimuli to its characteristics, meaning trying to categorize which stimuli is. And for Brentano, the rest was all about categorizing it and attaching it to a semantic marker so that it could be spoken about. But here, Paniker, who was a triple PhD, very rare, unusual, incredible guy to read, a PhD in science, theology, and philosophy. He has both Hindu and Catholic background, and he was integrating the two types of wisdom with science to try to explain how meaning emerges in the brain, but he did it through a transcendent experience. First moment, he said, it's a moment of pure experience, which in the long term, it could be qualified as awe, this moment, spiritual moment, which is an awe moment. Then he said that the experience could be retrieved, and the retrieval of that moment available for later referral was important. So those meanings stayed in memory. Then the interpretation we make about the experience with the aid of language was very important for him. That's the difference between, a person having a great experience, perhaps ending up in a mental institution, and a person being completely sound, able to articulate his or her experience to the whole world without vouching one moment because they know how to talk. And so linguistic integration with cultural within the cultural context was also a very good stepping stone, or a very important stepping stone, not just to safeguard the integrity of the individual who now can talk about his or her experience, but to bring that into the culture and then delivery and reception of wisdom and understanding of the knowledge of the transcendental through storytelling, because these are not things that can be delivered with a pill or or with anything like that, even though some spiritual experiences can be derived from certain substances which may lead to a very deep spiritual experiences. And we have these days already some evidence of that, good evidence of that. And but I'm not going to go there today. I'm just going to say that these experiences, once we have them, we can very soundly, intellectually, and rationally articulate them and impart the wisdom that comes with them. And finally, of these same steps, Aquinas talks about sensatio phantasmata, which Walter Freeman in the paper I recommended you equates to Hebbian nerve cell assembly, raw sense data, selection and transduction of stimuli action potentials, sensory perception and accommodation. So that's all sensory information that hits the senses. Then abstraction sensus communis means sensory cortex explores attractors in the fashion of chaotic attractors, and where order shows up, and AM patterns, which you show emerge, raise up, and that creates, together with the limbic system, all the emotional content and multisensory percepts, which are large-scale integration, integrated in the cortex, and that it's already a gestalt preparing the path for intentional action. And after that, imagination, intellectual, that's more of Aquinas. For Walter, that meant in his neuroscience, neocortex, global wave packet, human coniocortex, speech, symbolic cognition. Look, this is common to every one of these philosophers that I've just quoted. And in our paper, we also explain why, and Grangilet was the philosopher backing up that paper from the philosophy point of view. And then sensory abstraction sensus communis is sensory cortex again, new adaptation of attractors, knowledge, AM patterns, limbic system gestalt, again, multisensor percept, completion of the intentional action perception cycle, pre-sensatio, maintenance of the change, new state, and expectative background dynamics relax into habitual brain dynamics, where is exactly where I should go now and let you talk, people. All right, so with that, I'm very grateful. Big thanks to all of you for your patience. And we go back to here. I just want to say that my first motivation was always, when I wrote this paper, Inner Peace and Social Harmony, and our investigation still is guided by the same motivation, where transpersonal psychology, and that for me includes more than just Maslow and the humanists. I mean, put there for me Piaget, Carl Jung, and William James and others have contributed a great deal to understand spiritual experience. And then we have personal revelation, people who can give us their accounts, and everything that we can find in ancient text wisdoms, which can now synergize with the science of inner peace and social harmony. And perhaps when we nail this down together, we can aim at recreating a more meaningful society together, where we can share meaning in a way that it's more universal, and where we can find the ways to create a more vibrant and kind societies. And of course, upholding the sovereignty of the individual and the cultures and the people. All right, and the nations. Thank you for that. And with that, I leave you to the questions and answers.
Thank you for that, Joshua. That was very interesting.
You're welcome.
Would like to say, yeah, if there is anyone with questions online, we start, and then I will check here in person if there is anyone. Give a second. Otherwise, I might have a couple of questions just written down. So I might start with those.
Do I need to stop sharing, or you prefer me to stay there just in case we go to the slide?
Oh, maybe you can stay there in case you wanna show some
Okay.
slides. So go back. Yeah. So I just say I don't know much about this literature, so maybe I will just say something that is completely wrong, or so let me know. What I understood is that Freeman believes that the brain, the nervous system, does not process information but construct meaning, and that's the primary goal. But I think there was a slide at some point that says that the brain sample information, retain that information, and then construct meaning. So my question would be, if it doesn't process information, what's the point of sampling information and then construct meaning?
Well, that's an interesting question. I wish Walter was here to answer it, but I can answer what I got from him. Okay, with its you know, saving the distances, because Walter was Walter and I'm who I am. So basically, what I conceive the process to be is a process where there is meaningless sensory input data coming from the environment. Yeah, and that sensory input creates action potentials. Now, those action potentials somehow have to be how do you call it, relayed through the thalamic networks from different senses, so that in only sensory wise, the brain can make some form of holistic picture of what's going on with that stimuli. What is in the first place that stimuli that the brain is sampling from the environment. So then the question is, well, what is that? What's that kind of large scale integration? Is that you know, a bunch of combinations of zeros and one, or is that really, you know, something else? And for Walter, that something else was emerging from the dendritic networks, which are the oscillatory patterns that we capture with its defects, but we capture them in EEG and ECOG signals. Yeah, and those oscillatory patterns, to Walter, were what the carrier waves or oscillations of meaning. And now, how did these inputs were translated from action potentials into waves? Well, that's what the brain does, yes? But how does these waves carry the meaning? Well, if you look at, let's say, a sound wave, yeah, which is very different than a brain wave, but if you look at the sound wave while you're talking, you can see that whatever you mean to say, it shows up in wave pattern, yeah? And so the meaning is there. And I mean semantic meaning, it's right there. Yeah, but the meaning is not necessarily in the action potentials that are reading the wave, because you can send that wave through the airwaves and somebody else will play it and hear exactly the same words. And so for Walter, the meaning was really encoded, if I can use the word encoded. I dislike that word, but it was part of the content of these waves was the meaning of that stimuli for the animal. Now, for Walter, it's as I said before, it was irrelevant what was your metaphysical commitment, but he understood the brain as and the body and the soul and the mind as one thing, like Thomas Aquinas. There was no separation. There was no duality there. And so for him, mind and brain were a mystery unsolved still. But if meaning, which we know by firsthand experience, undeniably, as we talk to one another, this is veridical information. We go to any place to give our witnessing, and people, that's what we do. We talk, so we know that we say the truth, or we not say the truth, or we try to find facts. Well, that information, which is meaningful to us, if it was to be carried by the brain anyway, it was in these wave oscillatory patterns and not in the actions potentials only. So the feedback loops between action potentials and oscillatory patterns is what allowed the sampling of information to derive the meaning that was to travel or to be part of these wave packets that we observe in the brain. And that's the best explanation I can give you at the moment. Now, when he worked with with Vitiello in quantum field theory, Vitiello showed up with condensed matter physics that what we were observing at a classical level, at a macroscopic or mesoscopic level as oscillations, the way we saw them today, were actually the foundation of quantum mechanical transactions that mean nothing at an individual level, because one molecule of water, or one in the brain, or one electron of the brain, or would not shift anything, would not damage, as if we lose some cells, the structure of our body, well, the structure of the meaning and the memories of our brains. So he showed that we could rely on these patterns to be actually real carriers of field information where meaning was to be found. And that was the work between Walter and Giuseppe Vitiello, Walter Freeman and Giuseppe Vitiello. And that's complex quantum field theory. I don't want to go there. But the most important thing for us in practical things is, if those things are real and are truth, and we can accept their hypothesis. I have accepted that hypothesis personally. That's evident. Then we can study meaning on a more formal way, and intentional action and behavior, and transformative spiritual experiences in terms of brain dynamics. Like when I've been measuring lately, last year, people in meditation, people in solving arithmetic problems, people identifying scrambled words, and they show different oscillatory patterns and brain dynamics, and classify the states differently. So I think that's important for us. I hope that helps to answer the question.
Yeah, pretty much, but more clarified. Thank you. I don't know if Odyssey has a question.
I don't know how long he's been able to get from him, but based on your research, Joshua, is there a difference in neural activity between like behavioral values versus spiritual values?
Well, that is the great question of the future of our research. And the big problem that we have with that, I'm part of a group and we're discussing that day and night, but the big challenge we face here is, how do you identify, where is the measuring rose to identify who is an embodiment of love and who is faking love? That is a complete challenge and perhaps impossible task. And I used to put that case in a neuroscience class in Ottawa when I was doing my master's, when I was explaining to people that, you can have a pair of actors kissing each other, and let's say husband and wife who love each other, kissing each other, and film them with a camera, and then displaying the movie and asking people, well, who do you think love each other? And most people would say, well, both of them, or some people would even say the actors more, because they know how to act more loving, kind of emotional states better, or whatever. And but really what's going on inside in the actors is that they hate each other, and they are just doing the act because they're paid, while the husband and wife, they really share a sacred space. So I used to say to people, well, then we cannot define a kiss as an exchange of saliva between two lips that touch each other. That wouldn't do any good for any, people who love one another. You don't say that to your husband or your wife or your lover or your partner. It's not that. It's a shared space. It's something that we call, yeah, there is saliva and this and that going on the external level, but internally there is a shared space and a trust and something that we cannot put a finger with measurement devices. So the only resource or recourse we have to that, it's to actually start seriously doing first-person perspective science together with third-person perspective science, which is what we aim to do, which is measuring brain dynamics and heart rate variability and other, psychophysiological signs, but then go to the symptoms, which is what doctors do. They measure the signs, what they can measure, and they ask subjective questions to the patient. That's called symptoms. And then with a group of signs and symptoms, they determine the syndrome. So the question is, how do we determine who is acting something and who is really embodying a value? And well, if you can, any of you are more than welcome to participate in a creative design on how to make that happen. But that's definitely the second stage of that experiment or this research. And now the other part is we could find saints, but who would certify a saint? Let's say that Buddha was living and showed up at the cognitive lab and he said, well, I would like to be measured. I'm a saint. You will find that you measure compassion. Well, the brain dynamics that in a brain of, what we'll measure in the brain in a person of compassion or non-compassionate person, I would dare to say it's going to be exactly the same, a type of frequency spectrum, because compassion might not necessarily change the spectrum of the brain. It may relax the person, but people can get relaxed by breathing. So a person who knows how to breathe properly or meditate may be, showing certain brain dynamics that a compassionate person may be shown. So then we would have to identify between the effect of compassion and the effect of biological relaxation. And so those are challenges too. So really that requires us, again, even if it was Buddha, to rely on personal report. And then, of course, the actions and the way others feel or experience the presence of that person. So that personal report could be actually a social report too, not just a report. But then again, how do you design an experiment where people do not project their biases and say something that they didn't really feel or think? And so these are the challenges, and I wish that we will be able to overcome them. But I'm not waiting till then to share the stories on how to find the inner peace, because I think we can find the inner peace way before we unravel this situation. In the same manner, we love our kids way before we understand what love means from the brain perspective. We cannot wait for science to find out what's love to love our children or our friends or our grandparents. And so that's more or less the answer that I have for you at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I think that answer. Yep. All right. I don't want to take more of your time and stress your voice too much. So
no, don't worry. I have my orange juice, and actually, I'm very grateful. My voice has behaved so good. I have to, I'm grateful for that.
That was pretty good. Oh yeah, we have another question.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
It's very fascinating to see that by looking at the brain activity, you can see the psychological experience, like the process of creating knowledge and meaning. Here, I didn't forget how this understanding can help creating societal harmony and peace, I should say.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, I think I can repeat the question. I'm closer to the microphone. I guess the question is if how can the understanding of how this process creates love and meaning can help society or have a societal effect?
Oh, yeah, okay. So that's a really good question. So why did I have to take this into the sciences? Well, you read in one of the quotes of Walter that the sciences have excommunicated meaning, intentions, mind, all spiritual values. I mean, all that has been taken away from the scientific arena long time ago. And in the even in the quantum physics world, people like Schrödinger and Pauli and Bohm and others have already warned us big times that we should not forget about mind, and that mind and the observer have not been resolved just by measuring apparatus and devices and the physics that we do. And so we have to answer to these questions. And so the other side was the side of spiritual values, which are more the domain of mystical experiences and religious and spiritual experiences, which are not necessarily or have not been included in scientific studies, but just recently in the last maybe 20 years or something like that. Or they were there, but they were not really included as they have been in the last 20, 30 years, and more in the last 10 years. And so in order for us to invoke values which are supposed to be meaningful to us, just imagine the love for your family members or people that you really love, or let's say even your animals, or a place that you love, something that makes you feel really that you want to be kind to others. Those days that you feel like you're going to be kind to everybody. So what's that kindness? How do you measure that? Why is that so meaningful to you? What you wake up one day and suddenly you're treating super good everybody, and you want to be this good person? What's that supposed to mean in human life? And if that can be embodied for long periods of time, then how is that done? And what are the behaviors that get in the way? And that's the main part. The behaviors and the survival routines that we are, that our bodies are embedded with, sometimes enact reactions which operate against the best version of ourselves, to call it that way, to be kind, to embody kindness. And then we become upset or angry or even hateful to some people, and so on. And then the question is, how do we overcome that? And not only how do we overcome that, but how do we become masterful in order to be able to change a certain behavior or certain reactions, attenuate them very quickly. And so the question here is, if that's possible, how does the brain participate in that? And what's the role of spiritual values and spiritual practices in that? And the question, that question I chose to answer by saying, well, if we ought to tackle that problem scientifically, the first step is to reclaim meaning and values to the sciences. And so then I found Walter Freeman, was doing that work. And when I met Walter we clicked immediately, and he wasn't doing the work I'm doing, but he was doing the meaning and how the brain creates meaning. And I said to Walter, well, if we can in the science show that the brain really creates meaning for intentional action, because there will be no sense on making an action intentional or a goal meaningful if there is no meaning in our lives. That's a nonsense. And we can explain how in the brain, or where in the brain, at the very least, this is happening, and at what times when we see stimulus, we invoke those meanings and act on them. And he said to me, yep, that's my science. So then I carry on with doing that kind of brain dynamics with him and learning more about how the brain creates meaning. And then that gave me the systems neuroscientific foundation to also coin values and brain dynamics and behavior, because of course values and meaning are like twins. They go together. I mean, as I was saying to you before, what you value, it's meaningful, and what's meaningful, you value. And so that's why I think that as a stepping stone for society, which is more materialistic and more scientific, giving strength to the case of meaning in a scientific manner would would bring an ease to the study, scientific study of inner peaceful states, which then will contribute for more people to explore those areas of consciousness within themselves, which if they master, will contribute to social harmony. So it's, do the job in science, in meaning, make it science so that people can pay attention. People can pay attention, then practice inner peace, master inner peace, then I aim for a better society and to build meaning together. How we will build meaning together. That's something that we responsibly need to do, and our brains can do it if we guide our brains on how to do that. So the guiding part of how to build meaning is part of what I think we will benefit too, by understanding better how the brain creates meaning.
Thank you. I think thanks for the
welcome.
question.
I hope that helped.
Definitely, yeah. Yep, got the confirmation. So I think we are 20 minutes over, so I think we can call it here. Thank you again, Joshua, and thank you for everybody here and on Zoom. And see you in the next seminar.
And thank you everybody for coming. I really am grateful to every one of you.
Thank you, Joshua.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.